Venom, Let There Be Carnage is the new Venom movie directed by Andy Serkis and starring Tom Hardy, Woody Harrelson, Michelle Williams, and Naomi Harris. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of Venom, to say the least. 2018's Venom was a movie that when I walked into, I expected Spider-Man. And I was one of those people that kind of was very adamant that Spider-Man should be a part of the story. I didn't really give it as much of a chance as maybe I should have, because at the end of the day, they are trying to tell a movie and their own story. And this isn't the comics, this is its own movie. And there are probably a lot of kids out there that are not familiar with the Venom character from the comics already, going into seeing 2018's Venom, and they don't really care if Spider-Man's in it or not. So that was possibly the case for why it made $800 million at the box office, because a lot of people, the majority of the movie-going audience that goes to see these films, do not read the comics. There's probably a majority of the people that were going to see Venom that never read a Venom comic and might not even know that Venom and Spider-Man are connected. So that was one of the biggest, I think, personal issues I had with the first Venom. But that's not the only problem I had with the first Venom. One of the biggest problems with that first movie was its villain in Riz Ahmed's Carlton Drake. Now, Riz Ahmed is one of this generation's greatest actors, and his acting talent is out of this world, whether it's The Night Of, whether it's Sound of Metal, or the numbers of other movies that he's been in. But unfortunately, they gave a great actor like Riz Ahmed a fairly forgettable villain in Carlton Drake. And he just wasn't up to par with, I think, the iconic character that is Venom. So having him, and also like the idea of Riot, the other symbiote villain in the first Venom, it just didn't mesh well, along with the unbalanced tone of like half the movie being serious and the other half of the movie being very comedic with a lot of the Venom jokes that they threw in there. And it just didn't feel like it was written properly, directed properly. It just felt like a mess of a movie. Well, then we get to the movie that I'm talking about today, which is Venom, Let There Be Carnage. And I have to say that Venom, Let There Be Carnage is a vast improvement over 2018's Venom. And when I mean vast improvement, I mean that as someone who personally did not care for the first Venom, though on rewatches I do appreciate 2018's Venom a bit more, Venom Let There Be Carnage actually left me walking out of the theater with a smile on my face. And I will go so far as to say that I think I had more fun watching Venom Let There Be Carnage than I had watching Deadpool 2, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and a couple of other Marvel films that have come out in the recent years. And I think the reason is that Venom Let There Be Carnage is so stupid that it actually works. And I will say that there are a bunch of films that it reminds me of, whether it's Batman and Robin, whether it is even like the early Marvel films, like Ang Lee's Hulk, and like there are some Marvel movies that when they came out back in the early 2000s, even the 90s, they weren't what you would call the peak of comic book movie storytelling. However, these films actually are a lot of fun to watch. And I am a huge Batman and Robin defender. I love that movie. It's one of the Batman movies I grew up with as a child, and it's still one of the movies I love watching today. And I think one of the main reasons for that film is it just feels like a comic book. And as much as I love The Dark Knight, as much as I love movies like Captain America Winter Soldier and Logan, and like a whole bunch of other more serious, down-to-earth, gritty comic book films, those films are more so inspired by Frank Miller's writing of comics, and not really where comics originated from, which is like the old Stan Lee, Steve Ditko Spider-Man runs, or Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, and all these great comic book writers who created these characters that now today would look cheesy, but back then that was what was the entertainment. And I think watching films today, like these comic book films, it's always fun to see them not be afraid of embracing that cheesiness, that wackiness, the thing that kind of started them in the beginning. And I think that is what really makes Venom Let There Be Carnage hit me in the way it does, because it is just a fun movie to watch. It's not the serious, try-hard version that Venom 2018 is. And I should also say that film is directed by Ruben Fleischer, but I just call it 2018 Venom. And that movie just is all messed up with its tone. One minute you see homeless people being kidnapped from the streets and being used as guinea pigs in experiments, and the next minute you see Venom talking about tater tots and chocolate. And it just doesn't balance well in that movie. This one, though, you can have a scene of Venom and Eddie having a couple's dispute over chickens, and then in contrast have a scene of Woody Harrelson's character, Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage, ripping apart a whole group of prison guards. And yet, for some reason, this balance works, because Woody Harrelson's character is a theatrical character. He is a character, Cletus Cassidy is a character that is specifically designed to be entertaining. And that is something that Carlton Drake from the very first Venom was not. His character was, in my opinion, a absolute bore and completely lacked any charisma or personality. Despite how good of an actor Riz Ahmed was, it's all in the script, and the script just was not that good. And I think this movie, even though I'm not going to say this is one of the best comic book films of all time, by no means, but Venom Let There Be Carnage has just an element to it that for every crazy thing that happens, you just kind of roll with it, and you get taken along this ride. This ride that's only 90 minutes long, and it just goes by in a flash. And Andy Serkis really deserves a lot of praise for this, because he had a huge task to follow in following the last Venom, which many critics do not like. It has a 30% on Rotten Tomatoes, but the audience really enjoyed. So Andy Serkis had to balance the idea of an audience that really enjoyed the first Venom, and at the same time, a movie that a lot of people don't really think is good, critic-wise. So Andy Serkis had to take this and make it into something even more deep and special, and I think he accomplished this. I think Andy Serkis did a great job with this movie, and as someone who has been a massive fan of Andy Serkis's work as an actor, whether it is Lord of the Rings or King Kong or Planet of the Apes or even 13 going on 30, like, all of Andy Serkis's performance as an actor are great performances, but I didn't know how he would be as a director. And I watched his recent film that he made before Venom called Mowgli, and I thought he did a great job with that film. And I think that he even improved as a director making this. And it's very hard for these directors to make a movie like Venom in such a small amount of time with a character that really chews up the screen, no pun intended, the way he does. And we get that in this movie. Tom Hardy is terrific as Venom in this, and Eddie Brock. He brings this realness to the character, but he also brings like an almost comedic angle to this character where you laugh at him, but at the same time you kind of sympathize with him. He looks like a guy that is literally dying himself. Like, he doesn't look like a man that is at the right stage of his life where he could be, highly successful. And I think that is something that separates this film from other comic book movies, because most of the time, the other comic book movies, when a sequel comes out, the hero is usually in a better place than they were in the first film. Even in The Dark Knight, Bruce Wayne has, I think, more of a reign over his company, and he looks cleaner in The Dark Knight. Like, parts of The Dark Knight are by far, like, Bruce Wayne is going through a lot of bad stuff, but still, it's Spider-Man 2 and even Iron Man 2. These characters, when the film starts, like, they're at, like, the peak of their power, and it's all about how you dissect these characters and take them down a notch to see where you can give them a story in the sequel. But what's interesting with Venom, Let There Be Carnage, they kind of start off still without a job. Eddie isn't really as big as he was in the first Venom. He no longer has his TV show. It's like he's actually like hit rock bottom. And it's really interesting to see this in a sequel film. But I think another standout to acknowledge is Woody Harrelson as Carnage, because he brings a lot to the character. There's this one sequence between him and basically him telling the story of his past, and it's shot. It's not similar to the way they shoot the Candyman movie, but I like the idea of like a flashback sequence not told like a regular flashback sequence would. It's not a montage of scenes. It is illustrations, like an animated film, and it looks really cool. It's really unique, and it brings a lot to the character, and I think that one of the best parts about Carnage, for I'm not going to spoil it, but near the end of the film, you learn a bit more about his character that you didn't think you knew earlier in the film, and it adds a lot more depth to this character. On a rewatch, you will definitely, I think, feel a bit different towards Carnage that you did when you first saw it. So that is also something very, very notable to take mention of. Naomi Harris is in this movie as the character Shriek from the comics, and I think she's good. I mean, Naomi Harris is always a great actress, but the only issue I had with this character was that I feel like we didn't get enough of her backstory to understand her as a character. And that is one of the biggest criticisms I have, because this movie is focused a lot around Carnage and Shriek. And it gives us a lot of Carnage, but Shriek I wanted more of. And then another criticism I have towards this film is the use of Michelle Williams' character, who I really enjoy her character in the movie, but they do a couple of things with her that feel a little bit like a regression towards the work that we've seen in terms of like female characters in these superhero films, where in the first Venom, she actually wears the symbiote and she saves Eddie's life. And it just, that I thought was an interesting way to encapsulate a female character in a comic book movie that wasn't a female-led comic book film. This time, they kind of go back, given that it's a movie that feels like a movie from the 90s, a comic book film from the 90s, it also feels like this is how the women in comic book films were portrayed in the 90s. Because she is, without giving too many spoilers, she is a damsel in distress in this movie. And it is very hard to, I think, embrace that type of trope in today's Hollywood films, because it just feels so outdated, and the way she's used at the end of this movie just does not feel right. I hope that if they make a third Venom, they give her more to do. Now, it's not Deadpool 2 level bad, but I just hope that, given that you get an actress of the caliber of Michelle Williams, I want to see more from her. Because I like her character. She's really fun. So, yeah. Overall, Venom Let There Be Carnage is a fun film. I wouldn't say it is a great film, but I think it pays respect to a lot of comic book stories of Venom's past, and I feel like if you were a writer of Venom, you would probably be very pleased at what they did. It's a short film at 90 minutes. It has terrific pacing. The acting is great in this movie. And make sure to stay for the post-credit scene, because it is one of the best post-credit scenes I have ever seen, if not the best, and you do not want to miss it. So, thank you for listening to this review, and I hope you have a great day.